All the way from Bokota village in Limpopo, South Africa, we bring you Missionary Minds, where you can learn about family, church history, biblical worldview issues, and of course, missions, all from the mind of a real-world missionary of almost 20 years. And Buddy Paul, as Obadiah has been growing, my wife and I's son, and seeing him develop, we're often asking ourselves, how exactly should we go about disciplining him? What are the best ways? When it was in theory, as all things seem in theory, we thought, oh, this is going to be a breeze. This is going to be easy. It's just going to be, he disobeys, you spank him, done and dusted. We did not anticipate the curveballs and all the discernment that's needed and all the wisdom that's needed as well. And that brings us to our topic. How do I discipline my child in a way that honors God? Over to you, Mfundisi.
That makes me think of Martin Luther's quote that says, sin in the Christian life is like growing a beard. It's like you cut it and then it just comes right back. So that just reminds us that disciplining children is a lifelong endeavor. Of course, they're only in your house for a certain amount of time, but it's going to take a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. That's why the Proverbs give so much attention to discipline. It's written by a father to his son, and a lot of it is about the rod, which we would call spanking today. It's about discipline. It's about chastising. It's about rebuking. And not only Proverbs, but you think about the New Testament as well. Ephesians 6:4 might be the best passage on parenting. Fathers, train up your children in the ways of the Lord. Do not provoke him to wrath, but rather nurture him in the ways of the Lord. And so this is a lifelong task. And if we decide to have children, if the Lord gives us children, as we ought to aim to have children, it's just going to take a lot of work. So I thought today we could take some time to kind of unpack what that discipline looks like. And it's going to be different for those who are listening than those who have their favorite dog or parakeet at home. Why do so many people have pets today instead of children? And you see the photos with their pet, and they treat them almost like children, which I think is wicked. They're not created in God's image. They don't have a soul. They don't have a conscience. They are in submission to humans, and yet we have a dog because it doesn't take nearly as much work. Children take so much work. They take so much time, and it can get discouraging. So let's talk about some ways that we can discipline our children in a loving way that would honor God and help them become godly men and women.
You're right, brother. Many people seem to have abdicated the task of raising children and will opt for pets. And you see people calling themselves a cat mom or a dog dad. And that's the trend all these days. And we're all for loving our pets and caring for them, but not replacing children with pets. And so let's hop right into it with some methods of discipline. How often should discipline be?
Yeah, so it makes me think of, I like the verse Proverbs 19:18, which says, discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart against putting him to death. And I love that because on each side of that little tiny verse, there's guardrails, and then in the middle there's a motivation. So you have the commands on each side, and then you have the motivation in the middle, which is discipline your son. Oh, but isn't the Lord great that he gives us motivations? How many times have we come to the end of the day or in the middle of a discipline time and we think, is this making any difference? Like, does this matter? The child doesn't seem to be getting it. And that verse is a great reminder. There is hope. There is hope for keep on disciplining. And on the other side of that verse, it says, don't set your heart against putting him to death. Now, that could mean a couple things. It may mean don't discipline them so harshly that you're putting them to death. But on the other side, it could also mean keep on disciplining. Don't lose heart Because if you do lose heart, then you are essentially putting them to death by failing to discipline them. And we think about so many examples of the Old Testament, right? You think about Aaron, who was the high priest, and his two sons were scoundrels. Then you think about Eli, he was a high priest, his two sons were scoundrels. And even though, in a way, they disciplined them, they kind of gave up and they stopped being consistent in their discipline. And they were put to death. Both those 4 men were put to death by the Lord. And I think about them when I think about myself or other parents who want to quit, or they just throw in the towel and they say, I've tried this child is hopeless, they won't listen. No, discipline, there's hope, because if you stop disciplining them, even though you would never say, I want to do anything to harm my child, I love my child, and every parent that's not psychologically crazy, every parent loves their child, they want to see their child succeed, but if they fail to discipline them implicitly, they're almost putting them to death because of the consequences that they're going to face. So do not quit. Be consistent. Consistently discipline them. So let me give a couple examples. I remember Spurgeon said one time to I think the context was about evangelism, but Spurgeon said one time to a mother, why do you correct your child 20 times? And the mother said, because the first 19 times they didn't listen. And he said, that's exactly right. That's why we give the gospel. So we consistently discipline our children. What does the Bible say? Be not weary in well-doing, right? We just keep on doing it. We keep on working hard, training them. Now, that might mean verbal correction, discipline. It might mean physical correction. Now, Obi is, just about a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you've just started the kind of physical side of things, right?
Yeah.
The physical discipline. And when I say discipline, I don't mean the rod every time. In fact, I think verbal correction should come first. But when you see your child correct them. That might mean in the beginning, verbal correction. Sally, you hit your brother. Don't do that. Here's why you ought not to do that. But that also might mean physical correction, the rod spanking. And that takes a lot of time. But we put in the time because we look in the future and we say, I'm putting in the time now while they're small, so then in the future when they're big, I'm going to gain the rewards from this.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And balancing out that verbal and the physical discipline. Some people are all about positive parenting, affirmation only, say when the kid is doing
gentle
right.
Parenting.
Exactly. And they are all on that side. And then there are others who are really staunch, heavy-handed, where there's almost nothing on the verbal side and it's all physical. Less popular in the more westernized societies, but probably still there in more traditional ones. How would you say parents should go about trying to make sure that their kids understand the rules? Is that an important thing? Making sure the kids understand the rules, some verbal aspect before disciplining physically. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. You know, a team can't play correctly if they don't know the rules, right? So there's a lot of important things to lay down in the beginning. So make sure that when you discipline your child, that you have all the right facts, you know, and consider the source. You know, if your 5-year-old told you, you know, their 3-year-old brother did this, take that right with a grain of salt. So make sure you know the facts. Make sure you're analyzing yourself. I've thought this before, where my child did something wrong, and it was definitely wrong, but I know they got it from me. Or maybe they got a part of it from me, but they misconstrued it. So I factor that in. There's times where maybe I didn't discipline them as I normally would because I was the one at fault, and I actually had to apologize for it. And I said, you know, I can see you did this, which was wrong, but you actually learned it from me, and what I did was wrong. So I want to publicly acknowledge this, that what you saw in me was wrong. Don't do that. I'm going to work on not doing it myself. There's no excuse. What you did was still wrong, but take that into consideration as well. And then when you sit down with your child, I think there's kind of like a formula that we've kind of used. I might be getting ahead of what we're going to, but let me just jump ahead.
Yeah.
And that is a kind of a formula. Like when we discipline a child, let's say they're 6 years old and they need to receive some kind of physical discipline. We try to make sure that it's in private. So make sure it's not within eyesight. Make sure it's not within earshot. Don't unnecessarily embarrass them. If you say, who cares? Like, they did it publicly. I think that probably goes back to don't provoke your children to wrath. That's just going to unnecessarily anger them. So don't embarrass them. What is the point of doing it in front of others? Do it privately, sit them down, explain to them how they broke the rules, and I think even better, showing them from the Bible. Did you use your tongue to build up your sibling or to tear them down? I did tear them down. Does the Bible say that the tongue is like a fire that can destroy? Yes. Well, because of that, there's going to be discipline. Okay, you take the time, then you take care of the discipline. You do it in a loving way. Make sure that your emotions are in check. If your emotions are not in check, just, give it some time. It was funny. The other day, I had some discipline. I told one of my children to go to the room and I'd be with them in a moment. And I forgot about them. So I'm in my study. It's like 20 minutes later. And one of the other children came by and said, so-and-so's been waiting. I was right in the thick of studying. Oh, no, I forgot. So, but that's the idea. You want to make sure there's a gap there if you're not emotionally coherent. And then discipline them. I think it's great to pray with the child each time. Make sure you wipe their tears, give them a hug, feel the love, and then have a clean break. I like saying, all done. Just those two words are a signal to my children. It's forgiven. It's over with. I'm not going to bring it up again. Maybe we'll talk about grounding in a moment, but that's one of the downsides of grounding. I'm not totally opposed to grounding, but that's one of the downsides of grounding is it prolongs. Like I want the forgive. I want to feel the closure of this. It's all done. And then you have them go off and play or do their work and you don't bring it up again. And it's a clean break. It's forgiveness. Those would just be some helpful steps, I think.
Yeah. That's very helpful because you've included the physical element. There's the sense in which you're going privately, you're disciplining, but you are including a verbal element in teaching them what God's word says, and then affirming them afterwards once it's all done, and that's very helpful. What would you say if we zoom in a little on the private element versus when you want to show an example to the other kids? So not necessarily that you're putting them over your lap and spanking them in front of the other kids, but there are certain maybe punishments. Like, okay, you have to go and do this now. You have to wash all the dishes by yourself now. You have to do this and that. Is there any value at all to a public setting there? I think of how Scripture speaks of certain things being in the presence of all, so that all may fear and learn.
Yes, that's a good cross-reference. 1 Timothy 5, which is pastors who publicly sin are publicly rebuked. So maybe there's some kind of application there. Yes, I've done that before. A child maybe has a public infraction. This might be a time that in family worship, you're gathered together and you have to be careful how you do this, but I think you can do it in such a way where you say, so-and-so, you had a bad attitude, let's say, in front of everyone. And because of that, there's going to be discipline. I think all of my children none of them are rebellious in the sense of they'll resist that. if I'm going to say that publicly in a loving, kind way, 99% of the time, they're going to lower their head and say, yes, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And then they'll publicly confess that. So maybe you could, the general rule, not always, but maybe the general rule is public sin, public confession.
Yeah.
Private sin, let's not publicly rebuke that, right?
That's helpful.
And I'm even thinking about you, because now I'm thinking, okay, Obi is still a year, but I'm just picturing you now. You're going to have some challenges. Let's say you're with your family or your wife's family, and let's say he does a public infraction, and you have to be, that's a whole new genre of discipline of how are you going to do this when you're at your in-laws' house. They're going to probably be very protective of their little grandson. Oh, don't hurt my grandson. And I think grandparents and mothers are particularly susceptible to the, I don't want to hurt my child.
Yes.
I want to pamper them. Have you and Miso talked through that at all, or how are you going to kind of work through some of those issues?
We haven't spoken through it yet, and thank you for teeing us up there. It'll be a good conversation. But I actually think there'll be multiple layers to work through, because in one sense you're thinking, will people think I am too hard on my child? Then in another sense you're thinking, because of the African background, depending on which sort of Black African background someone comes from, might people think I'm being too soft on my kid, saying, hey, you go to the bedroom, we're
rip a branch off the tree.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're thinking, like, hey, so many young people or older people now remember when they were young and their parents react in an outburst of anger, and you're disciplined in the moment, and that becomes normal. And so having to not fall off on either side of the horse, and want to discipline appropriately and not just please parents one way or the other.
Yeah. And I think I've seen this so many times with both of you, even though you're just starting this journey of marriage with Sesame Miso, it's just so important to be on the same page with your spouse.
Yeah.
So ideally, you'd like to be on the page with the church couple that you're going to their house and one of your children disobeys and you say, can I go in the back bedroom and take care of that? Would be ideal. Same with your grandparents and in-laws. But the most important thing is being on the same page on discipline with your spouse. So behind closed doors, you have to make an agreement that we will always take each other's side publicly. Children are very clever, and they will very quickly find what areas daddy is more lenient, what ways mommy is more lenient. Our children have spoken openly about this. I thought you just gave me your playbook. You're gonna regret this because you told me the playbook. But they will be clever in trying to divide the parents. So always, I don't need 2 or 3 witnesses. If my wife tells me so-and-so is disobedient, that's end of story. I acknowledge it. Now, and I publicly support her and vice versa. If there is a disagreement, though, on discipline, and there has been disagreements at times with my wife and I of how someone should be disciplined, privately. Work it through privately. And then present a united front. If you present a divided front, the children will expose that quickly.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that. I've already been thinking about that. Obi barely knows how to stand yet, and I've already seen that my wife and I will need to figure out a joint, unified approach to discipline, because sometimes he's doing something, and let's say he's being overly active when he's supposed to change, or he's wriggling in such a way where he's really animated, and my wife may look at that and think, I don't want you doing this right now. And I'm looking at it and thinking, oh, you're old boy, I love this, I can't wait to wrestle with you. And it's like, okay, so already we're going to have to be learning ways to come to oneness of mind as we approach the issue of discipline and how to deal with a child in those settings.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some benefits of discipline as we prepare to close off? What fruit does it hold for the future? And what else can it help with a parent or in the child's life?
Yeah, I would just say it's going to be better for you in the long run. It's just like any other part of life. If it's in winter time, did you work hard during the summer, to prepare for that? Did you chop the wood during the summertime so that you have a fireplace going in the wintertime? And when you have little kids, that's like the summertime. Like that's the time to chop the wood so that when it comes later, you can enjoy the roaring fire. And a lot of parents just flip it. They don't put in the work, and later on, they're going to suffer the consequences. Make sure that you discipline consistently with your children when they're small. It's just common sense. A 5-year-old is easier to handle than a 15-year-old. Put in the time now. If you're having to wrestle your 15-year-old, either metaphorically or physically, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So put in the work now.
Yeah.
And then another benefit is just going to save you from so much shame, heartache. There's proverb after proverb that says a rebellious son is a sadness to the mother. That's why you and I often like to say, it's maybe misleading to say just children are a blessing. It's better to say godly children are a blessing, faithful children are a blessing. But just saying children are a blessing is misleading because actually there's more proverbs that talk about how a rebellious child is a heartbreak to the child. They're not a blessing. They're a curse to their parents. So put in the time now so that you enjoy the fruits of it later on.
And what if someone says that, oh, if I discipline my kid, they're going to hate me. I'm causing them pain. They're crying. They're going to hate me in future if I continue disciplining them.
I don't think they will do that if you do it the right way. At least I'm speaking about my own children. Children struggle to hold a grudge, which I think is great. I've noticed this not just with my own kids, but other kids. They actually love discipline. Children love discipline because it gives them security and they feel safe. But you have to do it in the right way. If you do it in the right way, they'll value that discipline and then they'll thank you later on. A lot of the bitter kids are either speaking later in life because their parents did it the wrong way or their parents were hypocritical, which what do young people hate more than hypocrisy? Or their parents did do it right. They just remain rebellious in it. So I would say do it the right way. I remember a story I read where a man was going to the gallows and he asked for his mother to come, and his mother comes up and he bites her ear off. He whispers in his ear or in her ear and said, "You failed me. I'm here on the gallows because you abandoned me." And then he bit her ear off.
Wow.
And that's like an extreme example, but I know adults like that. They're very bitter with their parents. How many adults have you met? How many students have you met later in age that said, "Man, I'm really so thankful to my teachers in high school that they didn't demand I work hard on my schoolwork. I had this coach, he just let us do whatever we wanted. He said do 50 push-ups, but we all did 10. I love that guy. Oh, that parent, like they let me do whatever." What adults say that? It's the opposite. It's the adults that say, "I didn't like it at the time, but that coach was amazing. You have it so easy now. Our coaches, we had 2-a-day practices, and my parents said you had to be back at this time, and we had to do this amount of work." And our children, I mean, and we could be even more strict. I'm not praising myself, but they have to do significant music practice every single morning. They have to be up at 5 or 5:30 every morning. And we've gotten pushback from others about this. We know that they're going to thank us. In fact, they're already thanking us. A 6 and 7-year-old is not going to thank you for that. 10-year-old probably not. But already our teenagers are thanking us for this. And I know when they get older, they're going to thank us that we drilled into them early on. And I think it's the same way with discipline. do it the right way, the godly way. Following God's way is always best. So discipline the way the Bible says, and in the end, most likely, your children will love you and thank you for it.
Amen, brother. I've often said to your oldest, Audrey, that she has no idea what I would give to be able to play the piano like her. And that comes from that consistency and that strict discipline as well. What a treat, Mfundisi. To our audience, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to rate it and subscribe to keep posted with more upcoming content. Feel free to share this episode with someone who might find it interesting and submit any questions you may want answered in a future podcast. You can email those questions to paulschleiline@gmail.com. You can also visit betweentwocultures.com for other resources like this. I'm your host, Yamikani Katunga, and until next time, that's it from Missionary Minds.